And sometimes people don't really try to understand. It's like a circus that might come in town. But it's all right. It's just part of life. I'm digging it myself. I like it.
Dear friends, these are the bare and deeply sorrowful confessions of Jimi Hendrix. To the masses outside, he was a god, a magical musician beyond compare. People saw on stage a wild genius who could wear his guitar behind his back, bite each string with his teeth, or even kneel down to set his own guitar ablaze in some savage ritual. But here is the most miraculous thing. Even in those flames and those moments of apparent madness, the sound emanating from his hands transcended all standards. It became the most extraordinary music in the annals of human history. Yet if we only gaze at the glittering stage lights, we have inadvertently fallen into the very trap of superficiality that troubled him throughout his life. Behind that radiant glow and those screams of ecstatic crowds lies a reality so brutal it defies words. It is a story of a short life, yet one brimming with tempests, a journey besieged by absolute loneliness, crushed by the relentless racial oppression of his era, ravaged by merciless financial exploitation, and haunted by psychological wounds from childhood that never once found healing. Today we step past that dazzling light to peer deeply into the shadows behind the velvet curtain, where a musical genius had to sacrifice his very soul and life itself for his art. If you find that diving into the true nature and hidden depths of music legends offers real value, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel right now. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to bring you ever more authentic and profound perspectives in the videos to come. To understand the roots of a tragedy, we are forced to turn back time, to return to the very point where all wounds begin. In the winter of 1942, amid the most brutal phase of World War II, a child cried out at birth in King County Hospital in the city of Seattle, Washington. The child was registered by his young mother under the name Johnny Allen Hendrix. But tragedy was already lurking from the very moment he entered this world. His mother, Lucille Jeter, was only 17 years old, still a child herself, completely lacking the experience to bear the burden of motherhood. His father, Allen Hendrix, was a 21-year-old soldier stationed at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. The Army would not even grant him leave to see his newborn son. They had married only 8 months before. The total time they lived together under one roof before the father departed for service was exactly 3 days. The father's absence and the loneliness of a teenage mother in wartime Seattle laid the foundation for a childhood of complete abandonment. Lucille lost herself in dancing and the nightclubs along Jackson Street. She gradually abandoned her duty to care for her child. The unfortunate boy was passed around to neighbors and relatives. At merely 2 years old, he was even sent temporarily to Berkeley, California. Not until the fall of 1945, after receiving an honorable discharge, did Allen Hendrix journey to Berkeley to bring his son home to Seattle. A year later, he decided to rename his child James Marshall Hendrix in memory of his deceased younger brother. He fought to regain custody of the boy. He yearned to establish a peaceful home, but cruelly that modest dream never came to pass. When Jimmy turned 9, the already fragile marriage collapsed through a divorce court. The father won custody of the children, but their house never knew peace. It was a devastating combination of grinding poverty and daily chaos. The father took whatever work he could find. His meager wages could barely provide basic meals, let alone proper care. The tragedy reached its peak when some of Jimmy's younger siblings had to be placed in foster homes. The father was simply powerless in financial matters. Jimmy was fortunate enough to stay, but witnessing his siblings torn away left deep scars, a loneliness that could never be healed. In 1958, when Jimmy turned 15, his mother drifted away from life at age 32. The bitter end came after years lost in severe alcoholism. Worse still, his father kept this truth hidden. By the time Jimmy learned the truth, his mother had already been buried. He lost forever the chance to say goodbye. This was the moment when the American dream shattered completely for a poor child of color. The absence of maternal love, the silent death of his mother, and the crushing reality of poverty had shaped a personality extremely withdrawn, silent and shy. Behind the explosive, wild exterior that the world would later see on stage, there lived only a wounded soul. In those darkest hours, music appeared as the only psychological defense mechanism. Music was not merely a preference. It was home, the only safe refuge where the boy could release the torment bottled inside. Before owning an actual instrument, young Jimmy strummed a broomstick in the house as if it were an electric guitar. His father would later recall the image of straw fibers scattered across the bedroom floor, evidence of a musical hunger awakening with fierce intensity. The boy would stand on a hill outside Seattle's sports stadium just to hear Elvis Presley's voice drift out. He did not have enough dollars to buy an entrance ticket. He immersed himself in old records of B. King, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Buddy Holly. He could not read a single note of sheet music, but he taught himself by ear. He would slow down the record, copy each finger movement. He used his hands to practice exactly what his mind had memorized. Seeing that fire the same year his mother died, his father scraped together what he could to buy him his first old acoustic guitar for $5. A year later, the boy owned his first electric guitar, a white Supro Ozark. Jimi began playing for local bands like the Rocking Kings and had his first performance in the basement of Temple de Hirsch Synagogue. However, his deep immersion in music, combined with an environment lacking direction, caused his life to veer off course. He regularly skipped school and eventually dropped out of Garfield High School. Not until the 1990s would that school grant him an honorary diploma. His wandering steps on the streets led him into legal troubles. Twice arrested for sitting in stolen cars, facing real prison time at 18 years old. Jimi Hendrix confronted a life-and-death choice presented by the judge. Either go to jail or join the military. He chose to put on a uniform. Stepping into military service was never the wish of the young man, but it was the only door that allowed him to escape imprisonment. He was assigned to the famous 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. Here, he completed more than 20 parachute jumps from the sky. Yet the strict discipline and rigid command structure of military life stood in complete opposition to the free and uninhibited nature of the artist's soul. He disregarded regulations. He secretly clutched his guitar in the barracks. He became a constant headache for commanding officers. It was during those desolate days in the Kentucky barracks that a fateful meeting occurred. He met Billy Cox, a fellow soldier who played bass guitar. Two kindred spirits quickly connected through music. Together they formed the band The King Casuals. They managed to sneak out whenever possible to perform at clubs in nearby Nashville. The partnership and deep friendship forged in those cramped barracks would become a solid anchor. It would follow him until the final days of his life. After more than a year of service, recognizing that this young soldier could never fit into the rigid framework, the military granted him an honorable discharge. The reason given was incompatibility with military life. Casting off his uniform, he threw himself into the music world with fierce hunger. He began his journey through the Chitlin Circuit. This was a network of performance venues exclusively for black performers. It stretched across the American South and East during the era of severe racial segregation. It was an absolutely harsh environment. Meager pay, exhausting drives of hundreds of miles between cities, nights sleeping on cold floors in shabby rooms, and the disappointment of counting coins after each performance. Yet from an artistic perspective, this brutal school of hard knocks polished an extraordinary stage presence, playing guitar for luminaries like Jackie Wilson, Sam Cooke, Little Richard, and the Isley Brothers. He absorbed every performance skill. He learned to control the emotions of crowds. He trained his ability to improvise with genius. He possessed the remarkable ability to memorize an entire set list after hearing it just once. Yet the creative fire burning inside him was too great to remain in a supporting role. His wild performance style, his garish clothing, his explosive solos inadvertently stole the spotlight from the headliners. This uncontrollable prominence led to constant dismissals. From Little Richard himself, from the Isley Brothers. He was simply too distinctive, too explosive to accept being confined to a backup role. By the middle of the 1960s, his journey of seeking knowledge led him to the city of New York. He changed his stage name to Jimmy James. He founded and led the band Jimmy James and the Blue Flames. He dominated the night music scene at Café Wah in Greenwich Village. Here, an original musical style began to emerge, the perfect fusion of authentic blues foundations with the bold experimental spirit of rock. Rumors of a black guitarist who could produce sounds never before heard in recorded history began spreading throughout New York's underground music scene. In the summer of 1966, the greatest turning point of his life appeared. Chas Chandler, the bass player of the legendary English rock band The Animals, was searching for talent in New York when he walked into Café Wah. In the moment he witnessed Jimmy James wielding his fingers across the stage, Chandler immediately recognized that he was standing before a genius who could transform the face of music worldwide. He approached the young guitarist and extended an invitation to chase his dreams across the Atlantic Ocean. In September of 1966, at age 23, with empty hands and an old guitar, the young man boarded a flight toward London. He left behind his American homeland, the place that had never been ready to receive his talent. He embarked on an adventure through history, where great glory and the cruelest of tragedies awaited him ahead. Setting foot in the mists of London, the transformation journey of the black guitarist began at a dizzying pace. Chas Chandler immediately set to work molding a new icon. He adjusted the spelling of his name from Jimmy to Jimmy. He reshaped his wild fashion style. He conducted auditions to form the classical trio Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums. The Jimi Hendrix experience was officially born. In merely a few short weeks, the name Jimi Hendrix created a genuine earthquake. It sent electric shockwaves through the entire British rock community. The most towering monuments of the era, Eric Clapton, Paul McCartney, and Pete Townshend, all felt curiosity stirring. They made their way one by one to performances to witness with their own eyes this American newcomer. Jimmy's appearance was so brutal that Eric Clapton, after watching, returned to his bandmates in utter shock. He admitted that this young man would permanently transform the entire structure of modern music. Commercial success arrived like a great storm. The debut single, Hey Joe, released at the end of 1966, quickly shot straight into the top 10 of the British charts. The ascent continued unabated in the spring of the following year with two hit songs, Purple Haze and The Wind Cries Mary. In the summer of 1967, his debut album, Are You Experienced, officially arrived. It instantly became one of the greatest records of all time. It carried Jimmy's name into the Temple of Legend. Yet behind that radiant glow in Europe lay a reality profoundly complex in both culture and history. Though reaching the pinnacle of fame, Jimi Hendrix inadvertently fell into a trap. He found himself caught between two racial chasms during an era when the civil rights movement was boiling over. The white media of that early period viewed him through a lens filled with prejudice and curiosity. They portrayed him as a wild phenomenon of pure instinct, a strange jester on stage, rather than recognizing the genius, intellect, and musical brilliance of a true artist. From the opposite direction, he faced crushing pressure from his own community. Activists in the Black Power movement criticized him harshly. They accused him of playing music considered to belong to white people. They condemned him for performing before audiences that were predominantly white. They attacked him for refusing to make confrontational political statements on stage. It was a state of ultimate loneliness for an artist's soul. He was viewed with curiosity by the white media as some exotic creature. Yet he was turned away by the black community because they felt he lacked the spirit of struggle. Amid the waves of fracture tearing apart American society of that era, Jimmy chose silence. He used sounds that transcended all boundaries as his only language of liberation. Though he was already a radiant star in Europe, his name back home in America remained extremely faint. The true turning point in conquering his homeland occurred at the Monterey International Pop Festival in California. Only because of the strong endorsement and vigorous recommendation of Paul McCartney to the organizers did the Jimi Hendrix Experience receive a position to perform on the closing night of the event. On the Monterey stage that year, Jimmy created an immortal moment in the annals of popular culture. He knelt before his guitar. He poured gasoline on it. He set it ablaze in a ritual drenched with mythological power. Before the astonishment of tens of thousands of spectators, the fiery performance instantly burned away all barriers. It made the name Jimi Hendrix explode into a nationwide phenomenon in America after just one night. The period that followed marked the most intense flourishing of his artistic creative power. At the end of 1967, the album Axis Bold as Love arrived, and immediately after came the masterpiece Electric Ladyland. It was a groundbreaking double album. It became the only record in his career to claim the top position on the prestigious American Billboard 200 chart. This was the moment when his talent reached full maturity. He was ready to shatter every traditional sound convention. He was prepared to usher in an entirely new era. In stark contrast to the blinding glow above the burning stages behind the velvet curtain of the American record industry lay an underworld filled with traps and ruthless manipulation. As Jimi Hendrix's fame reached global proportions, he simultaneously became the prey of those seeking financial exploitation. After Chas Chandler's withdrawal, control of his entire career fell into the hands of Michael Jeffrey. Jeffrey was a manager with an infamous reputation. His methods were authoritarian and manipulative. He viewed Jimi not as a creative soul needing protection. He saw him as a money-printing machine to be squeezed dry. Through slave-like contracts signed when he was still an unknown musician wandering through impoverished stages, the management machine tightened its tentacles around his income. Ironically, though, he reached the pinnacle of fame as the highest-paid rock performer on the planet at the end of the 1960s. The actual cash flowing into Jimi's pockets was bitterly meager. He was continuously drowning in tangles of legal complications. Contentious copyright lawsuits from old record labels, prolonged financial disputes, and exhausting paternity lawsuits. The mind of a genius who wanted to devote himself entirely to music was being eroded by financial pressures. He was surrounded by the padding of ruthless people. Yet in that stagnation and confinement, the revolutionary thinking of Jimi Hendrix erupted once more. He decided to take a bold step, something unprecedented for a black artist of that era. He put his own money down to build his personal temple of sound. Electric Lady Studios, located right in Greenwich Village in New York City. Looking at this from a historical and music industry perspective, this was far more than a simple infrastructure investment decision. It was a proclamation of independence filled with pride, at a time when American record labels held absolute power of life and death. When they transformed recording studios into iron cages that controlled time and shaped the thinking of artists, Jimi's action completely demolished that dominance. Owning a state-of-the-art recording space was his way of reclaiming artistic control. It gave him freedom to experiment with new sound frequencies. He no longer had to endure surveillance or pressure from any producer boss. It was an invaluable legacy of self-determination. It paved the way for generations of independent artists to follow. Yet those breakthrough efforts could not prevent the internal cracks that had already taken root so deeply. The grueling touring machine wore down his body. Profound differences in musical direction pushed Jimi Hendrix and bassist Noel Redding toward opposite poles. Noel felt sidelined and exhausted before Jimi's obsessive perfectionism in the studio. Meanwhile, Jimi felt that the musical space of the trio had become too cramped for the ideas exploding inside his head. The mounting pressures from relentless touring schedules imposed by management became the final drop that overflowed the cup. The relationship between the band members officially shattered. It led to the unavoidable collapse of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. The classical trio that once shook the world officially closed the chapter of their journey. It left Jimi Hendrix standing at the threshold of complete isolation. He stood ready to step into the final leg of a path full of storms. After the old trio dissolved, Jimi Hendrix entered one of the most turbulent yet artistically rich periods of his career. In the summer of 1969, the historic music festival Woodstock took place. He was scheduled to close the event on Sunday night, but due to organizational delays, he did not take the stage until Monday dawn. The crowds of hundreds of thousands who originally assembled had thinned out considerably. Performing with an expanded collective called Gypsy Sun and Rainbows, this marked the return of his lifelong friend Billy Cox on bass. Jimi delivered a performance lasting nearly 2 hours. In that morning moment, an iconic moment of the century was born. Without any speech or political statement, he quietly raised the melody of the American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Using techniques of distortion control, feedback howls, and special effects on his electric guitar, he precisely mimicked the sound of cannon fire tearing through the air, the sound of bombs falling and exploding, air raid sirens wailing in the darkness, and human screams of anguish. Looking at this from a historical and cultural perspective, this was far more than an improvised performance. It was the most powerful and devastating anti-war proclamation of the 1960s. Drawing on the thinking of a former paratrooper who had experienced military discipline firsthand, combined with the perspective of a black man witnessing the tearing apart of American society, Jimi transformed his guitar into a weapon that laid bare the complete brutality of the Vietnam War. It expressed the suffering his country was enduring. He delivered a supreme political message without speaking a single word. When the media surrounded him asking about his actions, he answered with absolute calm. He said he still found the national anthem very beautiful. He was simply playing it according to his authentic feeling about the current atmosphere of America. By the transitional period between 1969 and 1970, he continued his venture into a new experiment. He formed the trio Band of Gypsies. This was an all-black artist lineup consisting of himself, Billy Cox, and drummer Buddy Miles. Though this combination partly arose from contractual obligations to resolve legal troubles behind the scenes, the music they created carried an entirely fresh vitality. A series of 4 performances during New Year's Eve and New Year's Day at the Fillmore East Theater in New York City was recorded and released as the album Band of Gypsies. This was also the final record released while he was still alive. However, as the early months of 1970 began, the storm machine surrounding his life started accelerating to a terrifying degree. At the same time, he had to face countless pressures. 2 civil lawsuits awaited trial. Contentious recording contract disputes escalated all the way to the London Supreme Court. And there was the spiritual gnawing from his complicated relationship with manager Michael Jeffrey. Recognizing clearly that those surrounding him were only circling him for financial purposes, he fell into a state of helplessness and deep exhaustion. To resolve mounting financial burdens, he was forced to throw himself into the Cry of Love tour. It stretched throughout spring and summer. That autumn, he appeared at the Isle of Wight Festival on the English coast before a sea of people estimated at more than 600,000 spectators. This was the largest crowd he had ever performed before in his lifetime. Yet on that grand stage, the burning flame of complete passion was no longer visible. Jimi displayed clear weariness and fatigue. The last major show of his career took place at the Love and Peace Festival on the island of Fehmarn in Germany. It was a disastrous night in terms of conditions. Torrential rain poured down. Strong winds gusted violently. The crowd was overly excited and aggressive. Despite the initial booing drawing on the seasoning of someone who had played the harshest stages, he strove to pull the audience back until the very last moment. This was also the last time in his life he stood on an official commercial stage before paying spectators. 10 days later, he appeared as a last impromptu performance at the jazz club Ronnie Scott's in London. He shared the stage with fellow musician friends. Those present that night recalled that the moment he stepped in, a strange current of electricity ran through the entire room. No one realized that this miraculous light blazing up was the final spark before the eternal curtain of night would close. In those final days in London, people no longer saw a wild rock icon on stage. What remained was only a 27-year-old man completely exhausted. He was surrounded by panic and desperation. Staying at Cumberland Hotel, he fell into a state of profound unease. He was constantly harassed by those who drained his strength and his finances. Acute insomnia gnawed at his mind night after night. His spirit descended into collapse. That night, after attending a small party in the Notting Hill district, he returned to the apartment of his girlfriend, Monica Danneman, at the Samarkand Hotel. In a desperate effort to find sleep to relieve the pressure, he consumed 9 sleeping pills of Vesparax prescribed to Danneman by a doctor. It was an horrific dose, 18 times higher than the safe recommended amount. The following dawn, he was found in a state of deep coma. Though he was rushed immediately to St. Mary Abbott Hospital, he took his last breath. The autopsy results determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation under the condition of severe sedative drug intoxication. Jimi Hendrix died at the age of exactly 27. However, his death did not close with a simple answer. British coroners recorded an open conclusion. This meant there was insufficient evidence to confirm whether this was suicide or a pure accident. This decision opened questions that would persist for more than half a century. Inconsistencies in Dannemann's statements, combined with speculation about the role of manager Michael Jeffrey, who himself died in an airplane accident 3 years later, transformed his passing into one of the greatest mysteries in the annals of popular culture history. Though London police reviewed the file at the request of his friends, years afterward, no comprehensive investigation was ever reopened. In early autumn of that year, his funeral was held at Dunlap Baptist Church in the city of Seattle. Close colleagues like Miles Davis, John Hammond, and members of his former band came to bid him farewell one last time. Jimi Hendrix was brought home and laid to rest at Greenwood Cemetery in the Renton district of Washington state. He was placed right next to Lucille, his unfortunate mother who had died when he was only 15 years old. After countless storms, the final journey of exile in his life had brought the young man back into the arms of his mother. Looking at this from a psychological and historical perspective, the passing of Jimi Hendrix was not an isolated event. It was the opening gunshot for a tragedy known as the 27 Club. He died only 1 year after Brian Jones. And just 3 weeks after his death, singer Janis Joplin followed in his footsteps. Then Jim Morrison died the following summer. This was a cruel warning about the dark side of mental health in the world of entertainment. It was the direct consequence of being drained by relentless touring schedules. It was caused by the terrifying pressure of fame that came too quickly. And above all, it was the complete absence of any system of professional psychological support. In the 1970s, society glorified the wild lifestyle of stars, yet it completely ignored the silent cries for help behind the velvet curtain. It abandoned those young talents left to battle psychological wounds alone, only to receive consequences of profound tragedy in return. Jimi Hendrix engaged in professional artistic activity for less than 4 years, yet that short span of time was more than enough for him to execute a complete revolution. He redefined everything a single electric guitar could create. From the perspective of sound technique, his thinking transcended all contemporary boundaries. Before Jimi appeared, phenomena like feedback howls, fuzz and distortion effects, or whammy bar manipulation were all considered technical accidents. They were regarded as sound errors that needed to be eliminated in the recording studio. But with genius ears combined with fearless experimental spirit, he tamed those very noise artifacts. He transformed them into a standard musical language full of emotional expression. Combined with effects pedals that altered sound color, he did far more than simply play individual notes. He made his guitar speak with voice. It screamed and wailed with the anguish of an entire era. It released guttural roars that tore at the soul. This revolutionary approach laid direct foundation stones for the explosion of genres that followed, from hard rock, heavy metal, and funk rock all the way to grunge music. That harsh and iconic sound emerged from his hometown of Seattle during the 1990s. The scope of Jimi Hendrix's legacy was not confined within the boundaries of rock music. His influence spread powerfully, like an underground current flowing through many generations and many different music genres. Not only modern guitar masters ranging from Prince Red Hot Chili Peppers to John Mayer viewed him as a guiding lighthouse. Even the hip-hop culture and mainstream American pop owe him an enormous debt of thought. Leading sound engineers and music producers constantly sampled. They reused his unique guitar phrases and tonal colors. They used them as the creative foundation for classic hip-hop recordings. His free harmonic thinking became an endless source of inspiration. It shaped the way modern music operates today. Looking back at the entire journey, Jimi Hendrix is the clearest incarnation of a genius who matured from grinding poverty. He carried profound psychological wounds from childhood. He crossed storms of racial discrimination and the cruel exploitation of the entertainment industry. Then he used that very suffering to set ablaze the most radiant flame of artistic fire. More than half a century has passed since the day he laid down. Yet the sound he discovered on that stage remains intact and echoes fully. It shows no signs of aging. It continues to carry the resonance of the future. His story is not only a lesson about talent, it is a profound reminder about the price of creation. It reveals the hidden darkness behind the glittering lights of the stage. If this in-depth analysis has helped you gain a more comprehensive and profound understanding of the lives and legacies of music legends, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel today. Thank you for your support and accompaniment. I look forward to seeing you again in the journeys of discovery to come.